Sometime between 6,000 years ago and 16 billion years ago, God created the heavens and the earth. The numbers are a little funky. People aren't quite sure. Listen, it's either 6,000 or 16 billion. We don't quite know. Humans come about in the midst of this earth. Human beings begin to organize themselves into civilizations and communities, and they immediately realize there's a bunch of crap you got to do as a human being that you just don't want to do. Right? You get your tribe together, you got to hunt, you got to gather, you got to cook, you got to clean, you got to return email. There are all these things. The ancient people were just like, this sucks. We don't want to do this anymore. And so they had this brilliant idea, very innovative at the time. The idea was, you can just go with some stones and you beat some people dead. Hear me out, okay? I'm not done yet. Just the first part. And then you just kidnap some people and you take them to your place and then you say, hey, you're going to do all those things we don't want to do anymore. It's called slavery. Maybe you've heard of it. Very popular throughout human history. All over the place. We don't want to do it. We could just make other people do it, and if they don't, we'll kill them. It is such an efficient system. You guys aren't, you're like, maybe. And there's this ancient story, a group of slaves in ancient Egypt. Slaves are called the Israelites. And the Israelites are slaves. Their job is to make bricks. And they do this for generations. They are so sick of making bricks. So they cry out to some god, some power, some great voice in the sky. They cry out, won't anyone see our suffering as slaves? Will anyone not come and aid us? And the story that I'm a part of, this old Bible that I read, that documents this tale, says that a God does hear them, and God intervenes in the situation. Now, as soon as I say God, a few people here might think, oh, that word's loaded with baggage. So if the word God is loaded in baggage for you, I understand. So I give you permission over the course of this talk to just translate it. If you need to translate the word God because for you it has been used and abused in a way that makes it not ring true, translate it. Right? You can translate it to ultimate power. You can translate it to the universe in some strange way. Just the universe generally. You can do the universe. You can do an ultimate power of love. You can do love. When I'm talking about God, I'm not talking about a white man in the sky on a throne. I always picture him kind of like spinning like a satellite. I don't know why. And like if your prayers are heard, it's because he's facing Earth and he's like, got it! And then he shoots it back off. If you need to translate it, translate it. When I'm talking about God, I'm talking about a source of love that created all things and holds all things together and is moving all things forward in the direction of love. So this God, this source of love, hears the cry of these slaves, and God starts to deliver them from their slavery. He takes them out of slavery and he leads them into the wilderness. Free people, yes! But there's a proverb. It's a modern day proverb that illustrates exactly what happens to these now freed slaves. Now this proverb you may have seen on the back of like a truck somewhere. This proverb is written in large, fluffy pink lettering. The proverb reads, you can take a girl out of the country, but you cannot. Oh, there were times on the tour where people were like, take the country out of the girl, and they got up and did a little dance right then. It's like, whoa, it's amazing. You can take the girl out of the country, but you cannot, my friends, take the country out of the girl. Now, what does this proverb mean? We're going to dive deep tonight. Some of you are like, yes, this is going to be a really intelligent show. And I'm like, what does it mean? It means we're products of our environment. It means that you can't get away from where you came from. You will always be shaped by the way that you were brought up. You can take the girl out of the country, can't take the country out of the girl. Well, my friends, immediately these slaves who have been set free, they realize something too. You can take the people out of slavery, but taking the slavery out of the people, a little bit trickier, right? They've been slaves for generations, and now they're supposed to just flick a switch and be free people? Doesn't come that easily. So this God gives them some commandments, some rules to teach them how to be human. They've been under pharaohs and an empire. They're used to rules. So God says, I'll give you rules too. And these rules will teach you how to be human. Some of these rules all of us in this room will totally get on board with. Rules like, love and welcome the foreigner. Can we get behind that? Yeah. Care for the widow and the orphan among you. Yeah. We love it. Then there are rules that are weirder. Can I tell you one of my favorite weird biblical rules? This one's really good. This is in the Bible. If two men get in a fight, and they are wrestling with one another, and they are fighting, and now we are worried that these two men fighting in the ancient world, one of them might kill the other one. The law says, if a woman, one of the wives of the men, runs into the battle and grabs the testicles of the man fighting her husband, if you're not laughing at this, you are not picturing an angry wife ripping across the desert to run into a fight to the death and grab foreign testicles, not her husband's testicles, she's grabbed those before, but to grab foreign testicles. And it says, if she does damage, which for the record, if she's run across town to get there, I suspect damage will be done. If she does damage, you shall cut off her hand. Show her no mercy. It ends with that. Show her no mercy. Oh my gosh. That's a weird rule. It's a really strange law. There's another law similar. It's like if you're carrying a piece of heavy brick and you drop it and you happen to just, crush your own penis, like you do. I mean, if I can totally be honest, there's just a whole bunch of dick laws. There's honestly just a ton of dick laws all over the entire thing. What to do if it gets grabbed, if it gets crushed, how to cut it off right, what to do if it just goes off in the night. Some of you are being adorable. You're like, I don't know what you mean. Are you sure? Weird biblical laws. Another weird law, like this one. Do not boil a goat in its mother's milk. Don't get some milk down there and boil it up and then, and just down we go. Which is like, there are laws in the Bible. There are things I'm tempted to do, right? I'm like, oh, I would just love to do that sin. But the Bible says no. Like that one, I wasn't even tempted to do that. I wasn't like, oh man, you know what we should do now? Let's boil up a goat, man. Let's get crazy. Put it in its mother's milk. Oh, the Bible says no. Like, never got there myself. So, there's like good laws. We're all on board. There's dick laws. We're all confused. There's goat laws. We're all like, whatever. And then there are laws that are not nearly so strange and funny and are just a little more concerning. For the record, war in the ancient world is a reality. There is no option for life in the ancient world without war. That's the way the world worked. When you go to war and you slaughter your enemies and you kill all the men and you burn all the towers, you have won the battle. Yes, if you spot across the battlefield among the blood and the towers that have fallen and the smoke of the ashes, a hot-looking woman, and you want to have sex with her, you can kidnap her. And after kidnapping her, you can take her back to your tribe. When there, you can shave her head and clip her fingernails. And after doing that, you can wait 30 days. And after 30 days of waiting, you can marry her. And then after marrying her, you can have sex with her. Now, does anyone else find this law not just a little weird, but like totally and utterly disturbing? Does anyone else find this bloody and brutal and barbaric? There's a question we have to ask in the midst of these horrible, violent laws. How bad was it? So here's my thesis. You don't make a law unless there's a need to make a law. You don't make a law if it's happened once. You make a law if this is something that is common. There are rules about not having sex with goats. You don't make the law if there's like one guy and one goat, and he went and ruined it for everybody. No, there are like missing goats all over the place. They are walking out from the bush kind of just traumatized. And you're like, that's it! We need a rule! So you pull out some papyrus or sheepskin or whatever the hell you write it on, and you write with your ink, no sex with goats. And the whole town's like, bummer! You write it because it is so common, it has to be written down and posted publicly, right? So how bad was it? Let me tell you a little bit about how bad it was in the ancient Near Eastern world for women specifically who were victims of war. Now, first off, war is hell, and it is always worse on those who have the least rights and privileges in society, which then in the ancient world, and still today in many places, are the women and the children. Now, women, if the city walls fell, the women, if they were murdered right away, it would have been considered a blessing and a mercy if they died right away. Most of them would have been raped immediately, because that's why these men, part of why they go to war. They go to get all the money and to get all the land that they can and to get the women. It's a barbaric, primitive way of thinking about human beings. If she was lucky, she'd be raped and then killed. Now, many women were not so lucky. Many women would be taken along with this tribe and they'd be raped repeatedly as a sexual slave. Sometimes the women would become pregnant and then they would let the women carry to term, and when the child was born, they would look at the child, and if the child looked like it could be a warrior, they would bring the child into their tribe. If the child had any physical deformities, if the child was a female baby, they would either kill or leave the baby to the elements because they did not consider it a human life worth protecting. You can see these on walls still in lots of ancient cities. Images of women being carried as slaves, tied to poles, and this is strong language, so just a warning. There are these images of these women tied to poles, their breasts cut off, their bodies mutilated. There are accounts of men who, when they see the walls of their city falling, they would slaughter their own wives and children to spare them from the horrors of war in the ancient world. And into that situation, into that story, God gives a command. No rape. You will not rape a woman when you see her. You will not fulfill that desire, and you will not put that woman through more than she has already been through. You will take her home with you. Now, after she's been home, you're going to shave her head and clip her fingernails, both of which were signs in the ancient world of mourning. God saying, you shall give her time to grieve, to mourn what you all have done to her. You will give her 30 days to grieve, which was a traditional time of mourning. But it also gives the man in this situation 30 days to just like chill out. Because war is horrible to people, right? War is traumatic, and they are not in a mental state to make these decisions. You will take 30 days to calm yourself and get away from the battle. Now, if after 30 days you still want to have sex with her, then you can marry her. And now marriage, again, in the ancient world, it was not about, many of you know this, it's not about like love or like you are the piece to fill my puzzle. Like it's not what marriage typically was. Marriage was protection, security, citizenship. Marriage kept someone safe. You cannot just have sex with her after 30 days. You must marry her. And then after marrying her, you may have sex with her. Now, women in the room, are any of you going, you know, that's just what I've always wanted. If I could only find a man who would slaughter my husband and take me away to a foreign land and shave my head. If only. No. Is this text still bloody? Is it still brutal? And is it still barbaric? Is it a huge step forward from the way the world was? Is a huge step forward. Is it a huge step forward for the dignity of the victims, for those most marginalized in society? Is it a huge step forward to a world that is more just and more merciful? You better believe it. Absolutely. Is it what we want the UN to write down as their official policy? No! But thousands of years ago, was it a massive step forward? Of course it was. We want God to act like a magical fairy. That's how we want God to act. To just twinkle in with his little God wings and just pick them up and say, you don't belong here, and move them to a world where there's no more violence and no more death. But guess what, friends? That's not how the world works. We make decisions. We shape a world that is broken, and God does not jump in and take them magically to somewhere else. God comes in and takes them from where they are to the next step forward, in a better direction, in a more just and loving and merciful direction. God takes them from where they are and he moves them forward one step, and when they are there, they can be moved the next step. Here's a good example. If you're playing a video game and you are a level 3 knight, you cannot jump from a level 3 knight to a level 11 paladin, can you? You can't just, no? It's like, isn't working for anybody else in here? It's like one guy who's like, go on. I'm all ears. And it's me. I'm like, I love this metaphor. Not so much. Let's try this one. It's like a bicycle. Ooh. Now, on a bicycle, you have to shift gears, but you can't shift all the gears at once. You can't jump from first gear to fifth gear. The chain will pop off, you'll fly into a ditch, and somehow your bike will explode and you'll burn to death. It's a horrible tragedy. No. You've got to go from first gear to second gear. And only when you're in second gear can you shift again to third gear. And onward, you shift ahead, gear by gear, step by step, as you move in a new direction. This is what I think God is doing. He's not taking them from first gear to sixth gear. He's taking them from first to second to third to fourth. He is moving them along in a movement that will take them somewhere very different. But it happens one click at a time. Now, it's not like, God's got like 8 gears for them. He's got like hundreds or thousands or infinite gears to go towards God's dream for the world. But he does do it step by step by step by step. Jesus comes on the scene, and Jesus begins to speak this language of movement. Jesus says, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you," and he gives this whole teaching, and then he ends with, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." So that's where we are. Let's go back, click back one shift here. Let's talk about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now that is given in the midst of all the commands about, the goats and the dicks. All in there. There's this command about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now in the ancient world, and in the modern world, we all know that revenge is a dish best served violently. When somebody insults you, you don't want to insult them equally back. You want to insult them worse, right? Somebody attacks you, you want to get them back more, and violence has a way of escalating. In the ancient world, it worked like this as well. Say there were 2 tribes, and they were in a conflict together. And the one tribe went, and they walked by all the crops of the one tribe, and they took 1 stalk of grain. Ha ha ha. Well, then this tribe's like, you took our stalk of grain. And they're going to go over, and they're going to take all their grain. And this tribe's like, how dare you? How dare you take all... It's kind of got like an East Coast, West Coast hip-hop vibe, by the way. You're not picking up on that yet? It's like, well, then we're going to steal some of your money. And this tribe's like, if you steal our possessions, we will kidnap one of your soldiers. And they're like, if you kidnap one of our soldiers, we'll kidnap one of your chiefs. And they're like, if you kidnap a chief, we will murder one of your tribal leaders. And on it goes. The violence escalating higher and higher until Biggie and Tupac are dead. You know what I'm talking about? Because it keeps on going. It never ends. Violence will continue to escalate. And so in the midst of that culture, God gives this command, an eye for an eye and a... That's how he said it too. That's how God said it. You don't know what God sounds like, now you do. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Which means if someone takes your eye, you don't get to take their face. And now, by the way, I've never really understood how someone takes your eye. Like, I don't know if it's like, you got a big old wedding ring on, and then you're like, how dare you? And you punch them, and they're like, oh, my left eye only. And you're like, oh my gosh. And they're like, oh gosh, my eye. And then they're like, well, you know what has to happen. And they just lay them down and, they just kind of take out their eye. Or a tooth for a tooth. Another one, I don't really know how it works, but presumably at some point people's teeth were getting knocked out all over the place. Just one. I'm like, we got to find a way to solve this. All right, you get it. And they just sit there all night and they just wiggle. That one's mine. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's a way of stopping the violence. It's not going to keep escalating. It stays where it is. But an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is not going to heal the world. It still has an element of violence and revenge to it. So by the time Jesus comes along, he knows these people are ready to take the next shift. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That was a shift forward at the time, but I'm here to tell you about a new shift you can take. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That's some next level stuff right there. That is the next shift to take. And so these old commandments and laws and rules, by the time the early Jesus followers are getting together, they're trying to understand what were those rules, what were those laws that were given to these people thousands of years ago. And one of the early Christian leaders, a guy named Paul says, the law was our nanny. It was our nanny. And it came to help us grow up. But eventually, the nanny has to move on because you're all grown up. If you are a parent, I'm about to give you gold, all right? So you write this shit down because this is good. You'll love it. When I was a kid, I had this unquenchable addiction to Super Nintendo. Anybody else there with me? It would be like a beautiful day outside and I'd wake up in the morning and be like, what a wonderful day to play Super Nintendo. And then I would just go. My friend Dan and I would just play all day. My mom would be like, go outside. She'd kick us out of the house. And we'd walk out and the sun's out and we're like, yes. Oh, it's hot. Oh, it's warm. One of my earliest memories of my life is being 7 years old and just melting on the screen door of the house, being like, Mom! Mom! It's nature! Mom! Why don't you love us anymore? And we're just melting through the cracks of the screen doors. Vicious. So my mom had this brilliant idea. She said, I know what we'll do. And she introduced a currency in our home called Nintendo bucks. It was like a little jar in the kitchen. My mom took it very seriously. It was like a branded jar. Had a little Mario on it who was like, let's go, play outside. And she had it was insane. And I could earn Nintendo bucks. I could earn it if I did good things. If I helped with the dishes, 15 minutes in Nintendo bucks. If I cleaned the car, she'd even reward me, for the record, for doing things that other kids did for fun. She'd be like, go play football. And I'm like, well, what's it worth to you? Better pay up. Now imagine, 22 years later, my mother comes over to the house my wife and I own, where we live our adult lives. And imagine she comes over for dinner, she walks in the kitchen, she sees a little jar. It's branded nicely. It's got a little Mario on it. She's like, Kevin, what is that jar? I had to look back at her and say, well, that's Nintendo bucks, Mother. You taught me that to help me. Thank you, Mother, for giving me the gift of Nintendo bucks. My mom would just be like, oh no. No, 29, I'm checking in with Meg. I'm like, can I get 15 minutes? We all know Nintendo bucks was not meant to last forever, right? We all know that. Nintendo bucks was designed to be a gift for a season. It was designed to help me live as a functional human being, an adult. It was designed to break an addiction to little pixels. It was designed to move me somewhere. It was never designed to keep me somewhere. It was given for a time and a place, and there eventually comes a time where we all must bid Nintendo bucks farewell. Some of you are really sad about that. Some of you are like, oh my gosh, that's so emotional. Paul says, the law was like a nanny. And it was good for a time and a place, but it was never designed to keep you there. And if you're like, well, why don't we follow the rule? Because we don't have a nanny anymore. We've continued to shift forward, a time and a place. This is why rule-based religion can never work. Religion that is fixated and obsessed with specific rules and commands cannot work because it aims to solidify a law that was given to take you somewhere, and it makes it something that keeps you stuck somewhere. Rules and laws and commandments can be very helpful. Every child needs them, and so do most of us grown-ups. We need rules, but they're never designed to keep us somewhere. They're designed to teach us how to live. That is why the law was given. And so, when these Jesus followers get together, they have all their own weird issues and baggage. Okay, they've got, some of you are not going to like this, they've got women that they do not allow to teach or speak publicly. Some of us are like, oh my gosh, how can that be in the Bible? How can women not be allowed in some of these settings to preach or speak publicly? That's sexist. Or they had slaves. Oh, we don't like slaves, do we? Despite the fact that we own like 1 million of them, they're just somewhere else and we don't have to look at them. We don't like slaves, do we? Oh, you don't like that either, do you? Truth bombs, baby. Hashtag truth bombs. We got them. And we say, how could they have slaves? What primitive people in that ancient world. Meanwhile, we go, they're such primitive people, and then we get in our little cars that we like burn dinosaur fossils or whatever to like get around. We're like, they were so primitive. I go fast. Like, you know, they were primitive. I'll pump this black stuff we dug up from the earth and hope it never runs out. We're so progressive. They're the bunch of idiots. We've got our own stuff, don't we? We've got our own issues and systems we are stuck in. We have more slaves. We have more slaves. Slaves, see? We've got more slaves today working than ever in human history. We just don't see them. We drive around burning fuel. And here's the thing. 50, 60, 100, 200 years from now, people are going to look back on us and be like, I can't believe they just burned the stuff they found on the ground to get around. I cannot believe it. They put pipes everywhere, and they're just like, this will get there. I can't believe they put them underwater, and then they burst, and they'd be like, oops. People are going to look back and be like, what a bunch of monkeys. Freaking idiots. All of them. And we look back on them and say the same. Here's the thing. We're all products of our system and our environment. Slavery in the ancient world was the oil of their world. You couldn't just say, stop with the slaves immediately. It'd be like saying today, if anyone in this room uses oil, you're a bad human. And we'd all be like, oh, oops. Maybe one of you is like, I rode my bike here. Well, you've got a computer in your pocket that was harvested in Africa and put together in China. Get over yourselves, right? We are all a part of systems bigger than us that we would love, some of us would love to see changed, and we understand we're stuck in them. So were they. So here's what God does to them, and I would argue to us. God inceptions an idea in their brain. What if women don't have to submit just to men? What if men have to also submit to women? Oh, a dangerous idea. Here's the thing. In the ancient world, women always had to submit to men. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, had this whole thing about women submitting to men. When you said in the ancient world, wives, submit to your husbands, everybody went, duh. Obviously, that's the way the world is. And when these first Christians realized that men and women are equal before God, the first Christian leaders say, and men, submit to your wives. And the men all went, duh? Again, literally, it's somewhere in the Bible. You'll find it. What do you mean, submit to my wives? She's under me. And they would say, not in the new world that God's birthing. One of you does not rule over the other. You both submit to one another. Or this one. Masters, in God's reality, in this movement that is happening, you are not above your slaves. You and your slaves are brothers and sisters. So a master literally owns a slave. Bought him, own him, can do anything to him. And then when they get together at these little meals that the early Christians had, they're both equals. And the slave says to the master, can you pass me the ketchup? And the master's like, I'm a master. I own you. You're mine. And the slave says, not at this table. Can you pass me the ketchup already? Can you imagine? Can you imagine what that does to your social constructs? And ideas incepted into their minds. And then God says, what is the next simple step? Submit to one another, be family at the table. And that will move you step by step by step from the world you are in to an entirely new world. Can I get an amen? All right, so this quote somewhere. I got a quote here by historian Thomas Cahill. Now, Thomas Cahill, for the record, is not like a Christian historian, and by that I mean he's a real historian. He's not like sitting there being like, and again the Christians were right. Publish, he's like, it's right in history. He's just observing over how shift by shift by shift, click by click by click, God is taking his people and all of society from one place to another. So, let's begin. It's a bit of a long quote. Buckle in. Ideas take a long time to ferment, to dark fulfillment and rich bouquet. Paul's encouragement of Christian widows to remain free, and by that he means Paul, this early Christian leader, said to the widows who were Christians, you do not need to remarry. You can just be I'm a single ladies. That came from Paul. That is a direct quote. You don't need to remarry. You can be free of a man. Paul's encouragement of Christian widows to remain free will blossom into the early monastic sisterhoods. Click, click. And then into autonomous convents. Click, click. Of the Middle Ages, ruled by great abbesses like Bridget of Kildare and Hildegard of Bingen. For the first time, the world will experience the phenomenon of women, not ruled, sheltered, or protected by men, free women, for the first time. Each of these developments will serve as a stage in the gradual blossoming of feminism. Paul's insistence to Philemon was one of the early slave owners in the church. His insistence to Philemon that there are no slaves, only brothers, will prompt Patrick of Ireland in the 5th century to condemn as immoral all trade in human beings. Click, click. Then lead the Anabaptists in the late 17th century to the conviction that slavery is against God's word. Click, click. Then introduce the abolitionists in the 19th century to raise a universal agitation against the peculiar institution. Click, click. And finally, it will fire Martin Luther King in the 20th century to demand that Americans address the residual effects of slavery. Click, click, baby. And far beyond America's borders, everyone who fights to dismantle systems of class and economic oppression, who seek to establish human rights and universal brotherhood, is a child of this movement begotten by Paul. Not one of these developments evolving over the ages, clicking along, can be said to have reached its ultimate expression. We're not there yet. We haven't reached the ultimate expression of these things. But we can pinpoint the beginnings of feminism, abolitionism, and the movement for civil and human rights in the spiritual vision of Paul and his converts, who would no doubt be amazed of what we have made, of insights that were for them so new, dynamic, and otherworldly. Over time, shift by shift by shift, God moves these people. This spirit of love moves these people from where they are into an entirely new world, and he does it over a very long time. And if this should convince us of anything, friends, it should convince us that God is exceedingly patient. Oh my gosh, I can barely wait for a microwave, and God's like, a couple thousand years, I'm on it. Click by click, everybody. We've got to take everybody there. We're going to move our way. Click by click by click. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." There is a sense in which this is heading somewhere. early Jesus followers believed that there would come a day, this was a distinct idea among the Jews and the early Christians, that there would come a day where the world would finally be made right, where justice and mercy would be established, where those who had been killed before their time would resurrect to new life, where God would make things right. They believed there would be a day, but sometimes, as much as I long for that day, I have a hard time believing it. So I suffer from something. It's a self-diagnosis, but I think I'm right. Suffer from a diagnosis that I call FTF. Facebook Tragedy Fatigue. Does anybody else suffer from this? If you don't know what FTF is, Facebook Tragedy Fatigue, it's where you're scrolling through your phone and you come across something terrible and you go, oh man, should I click on that? Come on, be honest. Black youth shot unarmed in urban American city. Tens of thousands of Syrian refugees flee for asylum. Should I retweet that, or should I click on it? Should I read it? Should I give money or something to it? God forbid. What do I do? There's just so much tragedy. FTF tends to affect people, by the way, who spend a long time laying and scrolling in bed or take really long shits. That tends to be how FTF works. If you don't know, common symptoms. Yeah. Is that bad? How bad is it? Is it real horrible or kind of just a little horrible? I knew it was getting bad, my FTF, when I went down to the waterfront in Hamilton. We got that beautiful flag. You guys know that big Canadian flag? I was down there on a nice walk, and the flag was at half-mast. And this is how you know it's bad. I saw the flag at half-mast, and I thought to myself, which tragedy is that for again? I don't even know. Which one is it? There's a lot of them. Right? Don't you feel like flags at half-mast was something from another time and place? There's 1,000 of you in the town, and when Bob died, you're like, oh, Bob, lower the flag. You're like, Bob's dead. And everyone saw it, and they're like, God rest ye, Bob, R.I.P. But now, there's just so much suffering, and we know about all of it. The flag dropped halfway beginning in the middle of the 17th century. And the reason they dropped it halfway is because they believed that in times of great loss, there was an invisible flag of death flying over the flag of the country. Does anyone else here feel, when you read the news and you scroll on the internet, like there is an invisible flag of death that is always flying over us? So in June of 2015, 13 people gathered for a Bible study in downtown Charleston. 12 of them were regular attenders of the congregation, and one of them was a visitor. 12 of them were black, and one of them was white. And after an hour of studying scripture together, the visitor pulled out a gun and began to shoot and murder 9 of the other people in the Bible study. Does anyone remember how they felt the day they heard of the shooting in Charleston? It felt to me like there was a flag of death flying. It felt to me like any hope for a world of justice and mercy and love was just a fantasy. But then, I read the response of the victims' families when they finally saw the murderer face to face. Have you guys read these responses before? Let me read a few for you. Felicia Sanders, mother of 26-year-old Tywanza Sanders, said, "We welcomed you Wednesday night in our Bible study with open arms. You have killed some of the most beautiful people that I know. As we said in the Bible study, we enjoyed you, but may God have mercy on your soul." Mercy. Click, click. Anthony Thompson, husband of 59-year-old Myra Thompson, said, "I forgive you. I forgive you, and my family forgives you. But we would like you to take this opportunity to repent. Change your ways. I forgive you." Click, click. Alana Simmons, granddaughter of Pastor Daniel Simmons, said, "Although my grandfather and the other victims died at the hands of hate, this is proof. Everyone's plea for your soul is proof that they lived in love and their legacies will live in love. So hate won't win. Hallelujah. Click, click. Bethane Middleton Brown, sister of D. Payne Middleton Doctor, said, "For me, I'm a work in progress. And I acknowledge that I am very angry. But one thing that D. Payne always enjoined on our family is she taught us that we are the family that love built. We have no room for hating, so we have to forgive. I pray God on your soul." Click, click. Now, I've never lost anyone in that kind of way. But I imagine a very human response to the murder of 9 of your family and community members. I imagine a very logical response is to say, we want justice, don't we? We want his life. That is not even justice. That's not even an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You took 9 of the most beautiful people we know. The least we can ask for is your life in exchange. And what do? Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. They shifted in the most profound way into a whole different way of being human. Do you think they learned this overnight, by the way? Do you think they were just like, oh my gosh, a horrible tragedy. Let's just be nice and forgiving and loving? No. You don't think they've been doing this for a very long time. What do you think they've been doing in those Bible studies every other week? Coming together, learning, reflecting, growing, and practicing. They have been practicing how to be in this movement. So when the truly dark day of death comes, they are prepared to do the most difficult thing I can imagine doing. They are prepared to make that shift. And it's beautiful, and it's powerful, and it awakens in my cynical soul. And I imagine many of us here have cynical souls. It awakens in me, in the face of the flag of death, just a little bit of hope. Anyone else feel when you read those, when you hear those quotes, just a little bit of hope bubbling up inside of you? That there might be a future where there is no more pain and death. That forgiveness and love might actually have the final word. That this source of love that is moving all things forward may actually accomplish its ends. Does anyone else feel a bit of hope? Let me give you this then. Just don't crush it out right away. So the world's a cynical place. It would be easy to get back home and scroll quickly and just throw it out. Here's my invitation to you. Don't throw that little bit of hope out. Let it sit in your soul for a minute. Let it work on you and just see what it does. Sit with it for a while. Let it work on you. So here's the question. So what? Okay, so what? I mean, what does it mean for all of us? I suspect that there is no one in this room who would say, if you could just see me, like my inner life, like my secrets, like, who I am when I'm alone. If you could just see who I really am at the core of my being, you would see how I'm just killing it. Right? Man, this shit is hot. I am doing great. Nobody? Nobody at all that would say it? If you could see my past. Stellar track record. Really solid stuff. I came out of the womb swinging, and I've kept on swinging ever since. Never a day or a night that I regret. The whole thing, top to bottom, nailed it. Anybody? Nobody. Anybody who's like, oh, my future, all my hopes and dreams and goals, totally on track. Oh yeah, looking very likely, like a solid 70-90% that I'm gonna make it to every hope and dream I've had. Anybody? No, not exactly. Okay, so we live in a world that tells you every single day that you are defined by things that have happened to you, by where you are right now, or by where you want to be? How many of you have felt in the last week, if you could just make a little more money, if you could just lose a little bit of weight, if you could just put on a little muscle, if you could just get a better job that you're prouder of, if you could just get a little more education, if you could just get married, if you could just have children, if you could just do something else, get one more product, then I'd be happy and worth something and worth loving. Does anyone else in this room ever find that story running through their brain? What I love about movement, what I love about these shifts, is it says this to you. You are loved exactly where you are. There's no shift you have to make, nothing you have to accomplish, and nothing you have to do to receive or earn that love and grace. The love and grace of all the universe, the love and grace of God Himself is already bent towards you. You are already valuable. You are already worthwhile. You are already the beloved child of God, and you did nothing to earn it, so you can do nothing to lose it. And it is given to you as you are, and not as you think you should be. If His love is given freely to all people, then it is given to you. And then, any processing we do of our past, any sense of peace in our present, any hope for our future does not become something we do to earn something, because you've already got it. You get to do those things to further explore the all things that are already yours. There is a choice you get to make in the midst of receiving this love. And here's the choice. It has everything to do with a sign. Maybe you've seen this sign. And the sign is typically on some intersection somewhere. And the sign is held by a man with a big beard, usually in my experience. And he's like this. But he's like, I love you. And you're like, I don't think you do. And he's like, And on the sign, it's got these big old letters. It's written in, I just remember like WordPerfect back in the day. Remember, it's like written in that fire font, as if Clippy himself was like, use fire for effectiveness, you know? And in big old letters on fire, the word is repent. Repent. And what does repent mean? You see the fire sign and the guy holding it, and you're like, oh my gosh, what does repent mean? So nobody knows what that word means. Does it mean I hate myself, flog myself, discipline myself? What does it mean? I'll tell you what it means. Turn or return, which is way less effective on fire, for the record, right? Like, return. You're like, maybe I will. That doesn't seem so bad. Return. There is a path you were always meant to be on, and I bet you've walked off it once or twice. Return to it. Return to it. It was always yours. Return to it. I think that God is far less concerned with where we are and far more concerned with which direction we are moving in. It is possible, for the record, to shift in a shittier direction. I've done it a lot. To shift in the direction of being more selfish. To shift in the direction of hoarding more, to shift in the direction of prejudice and fear and anger. It's also possible to shift in a better direction, to shift into a life that is more loving and more gracious and more merciful and more just. You can make shifts into the world that God dreams of, and those, my brothers and sisters, are called holy shifts. You can make holy shifts. So I have this friend. Her name is Anne. Anne and her husband moved to Hamilton 6 years ago. And when she moved here, they had a young daughter. She had no job. They were in a new neighborhood in a new city, and it was the middle of winter. And I don't know if you've ever been unemployed during winter, but it's like nature itself is just like, give up. Like, you know, hey, just go back upstairs and hibernate till spring, baby. Like, It is miserable. And she went, what am I going to do? I'm bored out of my skull. I've got this kid I've got to take care of. I've never done this before. I don't know many people in the city, and it's death outside. What am I going to do? And she thought, you know what I can do? I can go for a walk every day. So she strapped up her baby and all that winter stuff you shove on them and they look like marshmallows. And she shoved the little marshmallow baby into the stroller and she began to go for a walk every single day. And she started walking around her neighborhood. She thought, you know what I should do? I should pray. A crazy idea, but she was like, I should pray about this. So she began to pray and say, God, what do I do? And as she began to pray, she started saying, you know what? This neighborhood doesn't have any place for people to connect. This neighborhood doesn't have anywhere where people can connect and meet up and some space, some sort of hub for the neighborhood. This neighborhood could use like a bar or a community center or a coffee shop. Oh crap, I'm supposed to open that coffee shop. I can go for a walk. I can start to pray. I can notice some needs. I can find my role in those needs. Click, 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 click. I don't know anything about coffee or running a business. She's like, I don't know the coffee part, nor do I know the shop part. Like, I've got none of this down. I guess I'm going to have to start learning about coffee. I guess I'm going to have to learn how to run a business and take some classes on that. And eventually, over time, it takes a long time, over years, she opened a coffee shop called The Cannon. And if you don't know what the Cannon is like Hamilton Mecca. Like at noon every day, everyone just turns east to the Cannon. And they just bow for a moment. And then they go about their day. And since then, people have been gathering and connecting in this shop. And it's become a place of life in this neighborhood. Click, click. I have this other friend. She's a pastor. And sometimes us pastors, we get together. We do like pastor meetings at coffee shops because that's what pastors do. We go for coffee professionally. It's really like the only thing we're good at. And we're sitting around and we're having this conversation about what makes a good church leader, which I'm like, shoot me in the face because I just don't care about that stuff. But like, I'm just not interested. But it's okay. I'm part of the gang. And she says to me later, you know, we've got this amazing leader in our church. He's so cool. He leads us in worship. If you don't know what worship is, it's like playing music up. But she's... get up to that satellite. And he's like, I feel it. More for me. The show is 100% theologically accurate. Stamp of approval. And she goes, we got this great guy, he leads worship. And he's allowed to lead worship. Every Sunday he comes, he's allowed to lead worship as long as he's not high on crack cocaine. I was like, it's like, you say that last part again? Worship? And after that, crack cocaine? That's the part. That was the part I was wondering about. And she goes, we gotta understand, all right, this is not some guy who's like, I'll try experimenting. This is a guy who has been using hard drugs longer than some people in this room have been alive. And she says, for this guy to give up drugs for one day is a massive step forward. It is it may be bigger than most shifts I make in my life for this man who has relied on drugs his whole life to go one day being sober. And when he comes and he is sober, we give him the right and the privilege to lead us in worship. I have these friends who had a baby. Give it up for babies. It's squishy. Really fragile. They are. They're super squishy. They can do nothing. They can't even hold their heads up. That's like the first thing you should do. Babies are adorable, though. Babies everywhere lately. It's insane. Our church, babies everywhere. Baby-pocalypse. That's what we call it. We used to say, like, it's baby-pocalypse round 4, and now it's like a rolling apocalypse of babies. In a big old tidal wave. Wham! They're super cute. We're like, catch one. It's so insane. Babies everywhere. So this couple had a baby. We do this thing. It's a weird religious thing. It's called a dedication. We do it in our church. For the layman, a dedication is where you take a baby that's new and you go to God as a whole church and you say, God, love the baby. That's more or less what we say. And then God's like, love the baby, love the baby, love the baby, I think. And then we go to this couple. And you, parents, love the baby. And love the baby, love the baby, love the baby. And then the coolest part, we go to this whole community of people, like tons of people from all different backgrounds, and we say, and all of you love the baby. And you all go, love the baby. I made you do it. Love the baby, love the baby, love the baby. Now, this dedication was beautiful, but it was different for one reason. The baby in question had two mothers. It was a lesbian couple in our church. Wonderful couple who we love. They'd been a part of the church for a while, and they had this baby. And we were so thrilled to honor them and love them and celebrate this baby. And for lots of people in our church, that was the most beautiful thing. This couple that would never otherwise go to church. Where else are they going to go? Come into this community, and they're welcomed in, and we take their daughter, and we love the baby, and we love them, and we walk with them. And that's wonderful. One of the people in our church, a friend named Zach. Zach says, man, I have never seen anything like that. I was so moved. I have never in my life felt so connected to a community, to this community, as I do right now. Because Zach wasn't raised in the church, for context. This is all new to him, and he's thinking, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Zach is walking in the hallway, chest puffed up, head held high, proud of our community, and he bumps into somebody else. And this somebody else has a very different story than Zach. It's a person who was raised in the church, who was raised around both church culture, good and bad. And this person says to Zach, I am just so uncomfortable with what happened today at church. I'm just so uncomfortable. I've just never felt so disconnected from this community. Because what we did, I don't feel is what God would have desired or God's best. It made me deeply uncomfortable. Now, as an aside, if you're somebody here who is uncomfortable with that story, start with this. I affirm your discomfort and I affirm your tensions in that. And these are tricky topics. All of life is tricky, and that is a difficult place to be. And so we honor you and we acknowledge your discomfort. Secondly, if you were uncomfortable with gay people in the church, that's fine. I will suggest, however, that now you have just a smidgen of understanding of how they feel in any church setting through all of human history. All right, I'm just saying. So if you're like, it made me uncomfortable, it's like, wow, join the club. And like, if you want to compete with them, you're probably going to lose, okay? So just as much as I acknowledge that this is complicated for everyone and we want to be a church where everybody is a part of it, there are certain people that have really faced a hard time on this one. So we kind of lean into that a bit. Thank you, one person, for really getting behind that. Anyways, it's difficult. So we go out after church, and Zach is fuming about this. He's like, there are people that are kind of crappy in the church? When did this happen? I'm so confused. Zach's like raving. And this is Zach's language, but he's just like, how can this happen? I don't understand. How can we? There are bigots in the church. His language, not mine. There are bigots. Can't we just, and Zach says, can't we just close our eyes for a minute? Can't we just close our eyes and we'll just like find a verse that says they've all got to get out, and then when we open our eyes and none of them are there, it'll just be this perfect little community because none of us have any sin. It'll just be a perfect community of affirming people. Yay. And it's Meg and I out for dinner, and our friend Zach and our friend Shannon, friend Guy Shannon says, Zach, we can't do that. And we're like, what? And Shannon goes, we can't just kick people out because they're not in the place where we are. And Shannon said, if you had done that a couple years ago, you would have purged me out of this church, and I'm gay. But a couple of years ago, I didn't know what to make of my sexuality and my faith and my experience with church. And if you had made a general sweeping statement to get rid of all of these people, you would have kicked out a young guy who was trying to figure out what it meant to follow Jesus, to be in a community, and to be gay. We need to give each other grace. Everyone is coming from their own story. And this idea of shifting forward, here's the kicker. It's not like a one-line direction. It is on all sides of the table. It is people coming in from every direction, from every place on earth, from every story imaginable. We all are shifting forward, and we're all coming from our own places. I want to tell you a story about this kid who I just could not stand. This little young guy, I just freaking hated him. And the problem is, it was me 10 years ago. Like when I think about me 10 years ago, I'm like, that little jerk. Because 10 years ago, I had some real issues. Because I had had this faith awakening when I was 17, 18 years old. It was a significant shift forward. I understood some more about identity. I understood some more about what it meant to follow God, to be in this movement. It was huge for me. And it also solidified kind of some of my own baggage and issues. I've heard sometimes this happens. And so I started getting grumpier and angrier. I had all these really easy answers to like the biggest mysteries of the universe, like heaven and hell and what men and women should be like. And I'm like, I know, I'm 18, which is, listen to me. I didn't know jack. But it was something that was helpful, but was beginning to really hurt me. And I remember learning about this idea of movement in my classes. And I had been shifting, and something I had shifted to was good. It was good for a long time, but now it was beginning to hurt me. I remember driving home from class, and I pulled over onto the side of the highway, and I started to cry. And I realized that I had to keep shifting. And sometimes I run into people who knew me from back then, and they begin to tell stories. Like, oh, I remember one time, Kevin, when you said this thing, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, don't mention me back then. Don't talk about who I used to be. Because it can be easy sometimes to give grace to others, but can be a whole lot more difficult to extend that same grace to yourself. Because that's the way God works. The big things always start small. The healing of the nations, the reconciliation of all things, the moral arc of the universe, it starts in you. And you can't give the world what you don't have. You can't forgive others if you're unwilling to forgive yourself. You can't love others if you refuse to love yourself. God's movement starts in you. What's the simple next step you're called to take? What's the next shift you can make? Because once you do it, you'll know what comes next. Like a tiny mustard seed or a bit of yeast working through dough, it starts in you, small, almost invisible, but it keeps growing, bigger and stronger with every shift forward, until it grows out from you into your family, your friends, your community, and together through all of us, the whole world shifts forward, click by click by click by click. Keep making holy shifts. Click, click.